It's my privilege to say in Chopper's absence, welcome to Chopper's Politics, live from the Conservative Party conference. Yay! My guest here today has had a bit of a change of job role since we teed her up to be our panellist today. She's the minister who spent most of the last year, as you know, travelling around the world securing post-Brexit trade deals. She's also the Minister for Women and Equalities at a time where discussions about women's safety have never been more prescient. And she is, of course, very well known for being a great ambassador for British cheese. Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to do a very quick rundown of your CV, if you don't mind. Liz is 46 and a Leo. She's born in Oxford, raised by her math professor father and her mother, who was a member of the CND. She attended Roundhay Comp before winning a place at Merton College, Oxford, to study PPE. She was president of the Oxford University Liberal Democrats before joining the Conservative Party in 1996. She was chairman of the Lewisham-Deptford Conservative Association from 1998 to 2000, then a councillor in Greenwich from 2006 to 2010. She made the Tory party A-list under David Cameron, and in 2010 was elected as the MP for South West Norfolk with a 50.9% share of the vote. After a stint as Education Minister, she became DEFRA Secretary in 2014, before becoming Justice Secretary in 2016. She then served as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, before becoming Secretary of State for International Trade. On the 15th of September, she became Foreign Secretary, only the second woman to hold the role after Margaret Beckett. She is married with 2 children. So let's start with the job. Can you please tell us what the conversation with Boris Johnson was like when he offered you the Foreign Secretary role?
So I went into Downing Street, and you go through a procedure in Downing Street where you go upstairs, so it's a kind of circuit. And I was led into the cabinet room, and the Prime Minister said to me, he said, "I like what you've been doing as Trade Secretary. I want to make you my Foreign Secretary."
And were you surprised, or did you see it coming?
Well, I was neither surprised nor not surprised, because you have to go into the reshuffle moment I think ready for anything. But I was certainly delighted to be given the role. I think there's a huge opportunity now as we forge our post-Brexit foreign policy. Clearly there are a lot of global challenges that we need to address, but I think the UK is an ideal position to work with friends and allies, to challenge malign actors, to secure security agreements as we just have with AUKUS, with the Australians and the Americans, and also to pursue closer economic ties with huge swathes and huge growing parts of the world, which I was pleased to lead as Trade Secretary.
Did any part of you feel a bit bad for Dominic Raab, who apparently was dragged from the office kicking and screaming?
Well, Dominic's a very good friend of mine, and of course we wrote a book together,
yes,
along with Kwasi Kwarteng and Priti Patel and Chris Skidmore, called Britannia Unchained. And I think he will be a brilliant Justice Secretary. That is a tough job. You know, we've got a lot of challenges, for example, improving the conviction rate for crimes like rape. And I think he will be a really tough Justice Secretary that actually does what needs to be done with the justice system.
As a mother of 2, was there any part of you that thought, goodness me, Foreign Secretary, it's going to require a lot of overseas travel, long-haul travel? Is this a job I can take on being a family woman as well as a professional woman?
I have been travelling a lot as Trade Secretary, and the key thing from the point of view of my 2 daughters is I never come home empty-handed. And if I come home, and the present always has to be better than the present from the last trip. This time they got some M&Ms from the Joe Biden White House.
Lovely.
They got some Day of the Dead themed memorabilia from Mexico. So I have to build on that. But yeah, they are delighted by the new job.
All right.
And the problem is, I think it's very hard when you're a politician to sort of separate out the rest of your life. So I talk endlessly about trade, and now I'm going to be talking endlessly with them about foreign policy. So they've got to get used to that.
Well, we'll talk about foreign policy in a moment, but let's talk about trade. Did you feel a bit smug when you actually have been very successful at signing these post-Brexit trade deals that nobody thought would be possible? I mean, how many have you signed now, and how did that year go?
So we've signed deals covering 68 countries. And you're absolutely right, Camilla. People said it couldn't be done. They said that we wouldn't get as good a deal as the EU had got because they were a block of 28. We were only one single country. But the fact is, every single deal is at least as good as what the EU got. And in the case of Japan, the deal goes further and faster in terms of things like mobility, in terms of digital and data, which are really important to the UK economy. And of course, we did the Australia deal, which broke the mould, I think, for the UK. And really went much further, particularly for all the under 35s in the audience who will now have the opportunity to go to Australia for 3 years without having to work on a farm.
And cheaper tam-tams and Vegemite. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, to be honest.
It's, you know, people are free to choose, aren't they, Camilla?
Exactly, they
That's
are.
the point. We want them to have the choice to eat these things. They don't necessarily have to do that. We want them to have the choice.
And obviously that's brilliant. You've signed loads of trade deals, but still the focus remains on the US-UK trade deal. Do you have confidence that one will be signed before the end of the decade?
Well, I don't agree with you, Camilla, that that's the be-all and end-all of trade. I mean, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who is getting absolutely stuck into the trade job, is going to be negotiating deals with India, deals to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, with the Gulf, with Israel. There's a huge pipeline of deals. And, you know, my message to the Americans is we're ready when you're ready. But there's a whole world out there. There are lots of fast-growing parts of the world who want to do business with Britain. And there is a full pipeline of trade deals we're negotiating. But what I think is really important, and this goes to broaden foreign policy, is that, you know, we, the Americans, the Australians, our friends and allies, are reaching out to developing countries to trade with them. Because if we're not reaching out to them, who is? Well, the answer is it's authoritarian regimes who don't have their best interest at heart, who don't believe in freedom and democracy like we do. So I believe it's really important for us as the United Kingdom to trade more with those developing countries, to invest more in those developing countries. And that's also important for the United States, because the alternative is much worse. And what we don't want is those countries getting dragged into the orbit of authoritarian regimes.
But then again, isn't the special relationship really important? And are you worried about its future?
I'm not worried about the future of the special relationship at all. We have a very close and positive relationship with the United States. We work very closely on security. This recent deal that we've done with Australia to provide nuclear-powered submarines shows that we're extending those security links. And what we need to see now is the United States also extending its trade links. And for me, Camilla, it's not an issue about the UK, it's an issue about trade and who is going to be leading the world in global trade. And we need to be part of that, but we can't do it on our own. And we need partners like Japan, partners like Australia, partners like America. And that's really my message to the Americans, is we want to see them out there.
I'll ask you about Afghanistan in a moment, but are you worried about Biden's leadership? I mean, he's called Sleepy Joe. Would you rather have been negotiating with Trump?
I'm very sorry.
Microphone.
This whole Madonna thing.
I know. We could do a skit in a minute. At the end of this, we could do like a prayer and hope that the microphone works all right.
We'll only do that if Michael Gove is here.
Oh, well, of course. That's quite right. He could do the background dancing, right?
He certainly could. He certainly could.
But back to Biden. I mean, do you worry about
back to
Sleepy
Biden.
Joe?
So the Prime Minister and I had an hour-and-a-half meeting with President Biden. You know, it was a very, very positive meeting. We talked about everything from trade to our security partnership to the future of the free world. And the great thing about Biden is he is a great Democrat. And he has been very clear that he's going to fight for democracy. He wants to work to challenge authoritarian regimes. And that hour-and-a-half meeting, I think, showed the depth of our relationship, but also his determination to do that.
You've mentioned AUKUS as well. Be honest, were you secretly quite happy about France's reaction to what happened?
Camilla, France are a very close partner of the UK.
Indeed, they are.
They are a great partner, and we work very closely with them. We're fellow members of the P5 on the Security Council. I met Le Drian, who's the French Foreign Minister, when I was at the United Nations General Assembly. But the fact is, this submarine issue is a matter between Australia and France. I mean, they were the ones who had the contract with France. They weren't happy with that contract. They're now working with us in the US. But of course, we want to involve France in future security relationships. And there have always been ups and downs in our relationship with the French. But ultimately, they are a democracy. They're a free enterprise nation, and we want to work with them.
And just speaking about France and Europe in general, we heard the Prime Minister on Andrew Marr this morning talking about some of the shortages and saying not really that it was a negative consequence of Brexit, but this sense that over the course of the last decade, wages have been depressed by foreign workers, and therefore we need to kind of recalibrate the entire economy. But what the readers will be wondering is, when are we going to find out that Brexit was a good decision? And are people going to be willing to stomach some short-term pain for long-term gain, do you think?
We're already seeing on the trade front that Brexit has made a real difference. You know, the EU have been negotiations with Australia for over 4 years, haven't got anywhere. We got an agreement in principle within a year. And I think we'll see similar on India. I think we'll see similar progress across the Pacific. So people will see, you know, lower tariffs for British businesses. They'll see more opportunities. They'll see more opportunities to go and live and work elsewhere in the world. So people will see those benefits of Brexit. But on the point about wages, the reality is we have had an economy that's underinvested in capital, that's used the fact that we have had a supply of relatively affordable workers to do jobs in this country. And in order to compete, we do need to get better technology, more machinery into our factories. We need to get more people involved in things like science and technology. And that is the way we are going to be a successful country. So the Prime Minister's absolutely right. And people said that free movement of people wasn't depressing wages, and that clearly isn't true. And we've seen the results.
What about him refusing to rule out shortages until Christmas and beyond? I mean, do you agree with that analysis?
Well, I don't believe in a command and control economy, so I don't believe the Prime Minister is responsible for, you know, what's in the shops. You know, this is why we have a free enterprise economy. I'm sure that, you know, that the goods will be delivered into our shops. And we saw, you know, during COVID, there was huge disruptions across the world's supply chains, and we're still seeing that backing up. So we're still seeing the results of shipping being disrupted. You know, air freight, because there are fewer planes flying, you know, there's less ability to transport freight in planes. So we're seeing elements of that disruption, but the best way to sort that out is by having enterprise coming up with the solutions, which they are doing.
Just talking as well, because you were talking about the importance of India and the Indo-Pacific. China then, I mean, your rhetoric on China, I think, has been noticeably more tough than perhaps your predecessors. Does that mean that your attitude to Beijing is also going to be tougher now you're in the top job?
My view is the way we challenge authoritarian regimes across the world is we do it through strength, through economic strength, through building up our security alliances. This is why infrastructure agreements with developing countries are so important. So they're not drawn into the orbit of authoritarian regimes. It's why trade agreements are so important, because we want our trade to be with like-minded partners. Now, of course, we have to trade with China. It's an important trading partner, but it has to be reliable trade, and there can't be intellectual property violation, there can't be forced technology transfer. China need to play by the rules, and that's what I'll be making very clear in my conference speech later this afternoon.
Okay, we look forward to that. Also, I can't speak to you in your capacity as Foreign Secretary without talking about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. She's been now in prison in Iran for 5 years. What hope do you think there is of releasing her within the next 12 months?
I am working very hard, and my team at the Foreign Office are working very hard to stop the unjust detention of Nazanin. I've spoken to her, I've spoken to her husband, Richard. It's an appalling situation she's in, separated from her daughter for so long. It's deeply, deeply distressing, and every day we are working to get her back home.
How confident do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 10? How confident are you that you get to release her?
I can't rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, to be frank. I've met the Iranian foreign minister. You know, we're working very hard at the negotiating level to get her out as soon as possible, and the other British detainees in Iran who have been unjustly detained.
Talking about that kind of same geographical area, how much in your in-tray do you have following the fall of Kabul, and what do you think we can learn? What lessons can we learn from the withdrawal from Afghanistan, do you think?
Well, clearly the situation in Afghanistan is very, very difficult. And of course, it's a big part of my job. You know, we've still got the 24-hour centre running at the Foreign Office, helping people return to the UK. What I'm also doing is working with other partners internationally. I talked about France, the United States. We discussed it at the P5 meeting, including China and Russia, because no one wants to see Afghanistan fall into a humanitarian crisis. We don't want to see it as a hotbed of terrorism. So we need to work with every single international partner to prevent that from happening. But I won't deny that it is a deeply difficult situation.
I mean, from your perspective, can we negotiate with the Taliban? How do you work with the Taliban in your role?
Well, the Taliban, what they've done so far is a real reversal of the progress that has been made in Afghanistan. And it's very important that we work closely with our allies, that we don't recognise the Taliban until they follow through on the promises they've made. And we're working very closely with our allies to make sure that the Taliban have strong incentives to do better. But it's in a very, very tricky situation that we simply didn't want to be in, and we're now in.
Also, as Women and Equalities Minister, you must be worried about what is happening, particularly to females in Afghanistan now.
Of course I am, and one of the key priorities for me as Foreign Secretary is to focus on women and girls, to make sure our development budget is focused on women and girls, to challenge the fact that in many countries girls are not getting a proper education, to challenge the appalling practice of female genital mutilation, and of course the use of sexual violence in war. And unfortunately during COVID we have seen retrograde steps on the rights of women and girls. And my view is, if women and girls don't have freedom in a society, if they're not able to succeed, that is both bad for them, but it's bad for the whole society as well. And of course Afghanistan is a case in point of that.
Just talking about your Women and Equalities brief, are you happy to do that, or that it is on top of your Foreign Secretary role? Because some people might think, particularly in the current climate, actually that should be hived off and given to a separate minister.
So I do not believe in hiving it off, because it should be a core function of the Home Secretary, of the Education Secretary, to make sure girls and women and LGBT people are getting a fair chance. If you put the responsibility on a different minister in the cabinet, it allows everybody else to evade responsibility. And I fundamentally don't agree with identity politics. I don't agree with the idea that you should have different policies for women and men. What I think is that you should make sure your policies are accessible to everybody. So you should be, in the criminal justice system, making sure women are being treated fairly, gay people are being treated fairly, black people are being treated fairly. You shouldn't have a group over there that treats people differently. And I think that's the fundamental problem. If you have a separate women's ministry, you're looking at people through the lens of being women. The thing I care about you, Camilla, is your ideas, your talent, your work ethic. I don't care whether you're a woman or a man, and that's the approach I take as Equality Secretary.
Amen to that.
Although I do recognise you are a woman, Mr. B, if you're going to...
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, are we able to recognise that people are women? I know when you talk about LGBT, Angela Rayner, every Tory's favourite politician, last week accused you of a new Section 28 by not letting transgender people self-identify. What's your response to that?
Well, I think we've taken the right approach with transgender people. We've made the process simpler. We've made the process kinder. I have full respect for transgender people. However, it wouldn't be right to have self-identification with no checks and balances in the system. And it's very clear under the Equality Act that there should be single-sex spaces allowed, and that is on the basis of biological sex. So I think it's perfectly possible to protect single-sex spaces and respect transgender people, and that's my position.
When it comes to self-identification then, what kind of evidence would you like to see before somebody is able to say that they are transitioning to either male or female?
Well, we already have that process in place, Camilla. There's a clear process of medical understanding of how that process works, and those medical checks are important.
Let's also just talk about Sarah Everard. I mean, I think what we've witnessed over the course of the last few weeks, particularly among women, but I know a lot of men have supported them in this kind of feeling of rage. I think it's very emotional, the response, which is very much this sense that women do not feel safe on the streets of Britain. And that, of course, has called into question the leadership at the Met. Do you still have confidence in Cressida Dick?
I do. Ultimately, it's a matter for the Home Secretary, the appointment of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, along with, of course, the Mayor of London. But I do think we need a change of culture in the police.
And how can it change?
There have been appalling failings in the Sarah Everard case, but it's not just the police, it is the criminal justice system. I talked earlier about Dominic Raab's new job as Justice Secretary. But we need to be bringing these perpetrators to justice quicker. The court process to be kinder. I'd like to see more women able to give video evidence rather than having to go through the harrowing experience of their crime in person in court. And overall, you know, the conviction rate needs to go up. I mean, it is appallingly low. I mean,
but
this isn't just, this is an entire culture of our criminal justice system.
Isn't there a sense, actually, that the criminal justice system has been found to be institutionally misogynistic?
I wouldn't use those words.
Why not? Is that too strong?
I wouldn't use those words, but what I would say is, as a woman, I do find, you know, walking home at night concerning. I don't like that air of concern. I do think as women, generally we are more fearful of going out, and that is fundamentally wrong. And it's something we have to change about our society.
Have you ever been the victim of sort of sexual harassment in your career, or just sexual inappropriateness?
I wouldn't say, I mean, I'm in the fortunate position of being in a senior role, so I don't think anyone would try it on in that way.
Might be
and
too
if
scared.
they did, they'd get very short shrift. But you know, I have observed the way women get treated sometimes. I think it's got better. I mean, I started my career in the mid-90s. I think we've seen an improvement since then. But, you know, it's definitely the case that women are more fearful of going out at night, of going to isolated area, and that inevitably holds people back from enjoying life to the full. And we need to address that.
Also, don't you think women get a lot more flack on social media? You get all sorts of abuse on social media. How do you cope with that?
I just don't read any of it, to be honest. The way I look at it is, if you go into a pub, you're not going to let some random stranger abuse you, are you? And likewise on social media, my view is just don't read it. Of course, I think the internet companies need to crack down on the vile abuse on social media, but you know, you can also just not read the stuff too.
I think I sent you a message making sure...
Not one of those abusive messages.
No, I sent you a very nice message.
Oh, right, okay.
I think persuading you, just making sure you were definitely going to do this, and I described you as catnip to our readers. And I heard that when it came to voices of dissent at the cabinet table over the health and social care levy, you weren't particularly in favour. Is that right?
Well, obviously I can't comment on any cabinet meetings which are... Well, come on. I've just been appointed in this new job, Camilla. I think revealing the contents of a cabinet meeting is probably,
why don't I rephrase,
probably not going to put me in the
why
best...
Why don't I rephrase the question?
In the best possible light.
Tax rises, they're not a great Tory look, are they?
Well, the Prime Minister's been very clear today on the Mar Show that he doesn't want to see taxes rise. He doesn't want to put more burdens on working people, and I think that's absolutely right. And the way we're going to do that is by growing the economy. You know, I've talked about how we are expanding our trade routes, how we're expanding economic alliances with other countries, how we're going to grow industries. Like, for example, the shipbuilding industry in Govan through our new AUKUS contract, and, you know, the Scotch whisky industry through our new trade deal with Australia, and our car industry through joining CPTPP. So this is the way we are going to make our country more successful. And the best way of increasing tax revenues is by seeing economic growth, so more companies are paying into the tax pot, and that's what we need to do. And I'm very supportive of the work Lord Froster's doing on deregulation. You know, now we've left the European Union, we need to get rid of some of the red tape that we amassed over being in that organisation. we do need to make our planning system simpler. I sat on a planning committee once. It's years of my life I won't get back. There's too much bureaucracy in Britain, and we need to, use this opportunity of a unfrozen moment, a fresh start to really do things differently. And that's the way to get more money into the exchequer to pay for COVID, in my view.
It would be remiss of me not to ask, do you want to be Prime Minister? And when?
I'm entirely focused on being Foreign
Secretary.
Secretary,
Come on.
and I've only just
we all have ambitions,
started
Liz. Come on
in
now.
the job. Well, no, I am just focused on the job.
But
Camilla.
one day, have you dreamt about being Prime Minister as a young woman?
I didn't even dream, Camilla, that I'd ever be sitting in this august position. When I was at school in Leeds, even being an MP was a remote hope in the back of my mind.
It's not a denial. It is not a denial. Before we go to questions from all of you lot, I'm going to just ask you some quick fire questions. Do you mind if we just do a quick it's funny and it's enjoyable. So,
enjoyable for you.
It's enjoyable for all of us. Milk in first or last in a cup of tea?
I don't have milk in my tea.
Interesting. Ooh. English breakfast or Earl Grey?
Earl Grey.
Very posh. Cream first or jam first on a scone?
I'm going to offend half of my West Country colleagues, but I think it's cream first.
Ooh. This is a great one. Cheddar or brie?
Cheddar. Well, that's
obviously.
Come on.
McDonald's or KFC?
McDonald's.
Thatcher or Churchill?
Thatcher.
Fair enough. Beer or wine or gin?
Gin or wine? I don't know.
What TV show have you binge watched lately?
So I've watched Vigil.
Oh, did you like it?
I thought, I did quite like it actually.
Some people found it a bit claustrophobic.
I love that though.
Did you?
I'm very keen to go on a submarine to celebrate the AUKUS deal.
Oh, what?
So I've never been on a fully functional submarine. So
who should be the next James Bond?
Well, sadly, I'm not available at the moment.
Well, how about this? The leader of the opposition thinks it should be a woman. Do you agree?
I still think Sean Connery is the best James Bond there's ever been.
On that?
And I'd like more of that type of man in the job.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Liz. A man's man. What you're saying there, Liz. On that bombshell, let's open it up to questions. Who has got a question? Put your hand up. We've got microphones that can go around. Say your name and where you're from, like we're on blankety blank, and then you can ask Liz what you like. Hello, sir.
Hello, both. Just before I kick off, just as this is the first question, I'd like to thank the both of you, Camilla and Madam Secretary, for coming and having a great event today.
Thank
it's
you
a great
very
way
much.
to kick off conference. My name's Justin Hallaby. I'm a councillor for the Hatch Lane Ward in London Borough of Waltham Forest, and I'm also the chairman of the newly found Conservative Friends of Turkish Cypriots, which, for anyone who wants to join, I'm going to put a shameless plug out there. We've got membership forms. Please do feel free to approach us. But, Madam Secretary, the question is, as a British citizen, I am immensely proud when I actually go to the airport, go to travel. I take out my passport, and maybe it's because I'm a bit of a geek, but when I look at the first page, it says something along the lines of the holder of this document will be allowed without let or hindrance to travel freely to whatever country you're going to, right? And it just gets the hairs on the back of my neck stuck up right away. You know, it's something which I'm immensely proud of as a British citizen. But as a British citizen, I'm still not allowed to travel to the place where my parents come from, and so can't over 500,000 Turkish Cypriots and many other British citizens who actually have property, businesses, friends and family.
So question is...
So the question is, to come to the question, when will this government actually allow British citizens to travel with direct flights to the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus?
Well, first of all, can I wholeheartedly agree with your point about being a British citizen? And I think we saw from the Labour conference last week that this is something Labour simply don't understand, is how proud people are of living in this country and being in this country, and they just And while they still come across as thoroughly ashamed of Britain, I don't think they'll ever be elected. I think that's their fundamental problem. You've happened on quite a tricky issue, if you don't mind my saying. But what I want to do is work to make sure that we protect peace in the area.
Just on the issue of the travel ban, I mean, we've seen some of the restrictions on red countries now being lifted. From your perspective, would you rather these rules just went? This whole traffic light system and just made it easier for people to travel now that we are returning to some semblance of normality?
We are returning to normality, and we are seeing more countries open up, and we're also seeing the protection that the vaccine has brought here in the UK. So I am pleased that we're opening up more. I'm particularly pleased that Australia is going to be opening up just in time for people to take full benefits of our trade deal.
Actually, on that note, can you let us into the secret of where you might be visiting first? Or give us a hint of maybe the continent?
So on my, I've already been to the US and Mexico.
Yes.
And I think next will be India.
Ah,
That's
okay.
the next
Very important.
planned visit.
Right, next question, guys. This chap here?
Thank you. Al Russell from Save the Children. Foreign Secretary, you've said we must trade more with developing countries so they're not drawn into the orbit of authoritarian regimes. Do you think the cuts to aid also risk reducing British influence in these places at the expense of things like China's Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, I've mentioned one of my priorities for development policy is girls and women. The other priority is infrastructure investment. And I think it's really important we work with countries like the US and Japan on a clear infrastructure offer, which is both honest and reliable, and challenges the investment from other nations that perhaps don't have quite such good intentions.
Are we moving to a sort of trade for aid scenario? I remember your predecessor, Priti Patel, would never describe it like that, but is that the direction of travel here?
What the huge advantage of development sitting in the Foreign Office is we can make sure our policies are aligned. And fundamentally, I believe that as countries trade more, they develop enterprise, they become freer, they become more successful, people gain more human rights. These are the important ways, but we've underdone the trade part of that. So development's an important part of that, but trade is also an important part of that. We've launched the new Developing Countries Trading Scheme, which is going to make it easier for low-income countries to trade with the UK, because ultimately them getting their own independence, their own economic independence, is what we want to see.
Okay. Next question. That lady there.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. So I'm Helena Penfold. I'm from southwestern Devon, Totnes. And I was wondering...
Have I offended you with the jam thing?
No, don't worry.
Right. Have I offended the Cornish? Sorry.
Yes, I'm fine.
George Eustace will be on to me.
Well, indeed. He might have more things to worry about at the moment, to be fair.
Well, I was wondering, because I'm hearing about what you're doing for women who've been unfairly imprisoned in other countries, for instance. Is there anything that we, on the ground level of the Conservative Party, can do to support that process?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'll put some thought into that. I don't have any immediate thoughts on what could be done, but I will think about that one.
Think about that. We might come back to that in a moment. This man with the glasses at the back on the right-hand side. Oh, yeah, either or. We can go to the other man with the glasses in a moment.
Hi, Ms. Truss. My name is Edward Howard. I'm from...
Love the hat.
Just to say
Thank
that Edward has just put on a Make Britain Great Again bright red hat for anybody listening to this.
Again, the cringe is real, I'm sorry. My question is, one of the things you were talking about earlier was the problem of institutional misogyny, as you put it, in the justice system.
To be fair, I put it like that. And
I didn't agree with that
Liz,
comment.
Liz said that was a bit
Camilla's
OTT.
opinion.
I was just trying to get a rise out of Liz. Didn't work.
One thing that has become very obvious about this issue is the problem of grooming gangs that have been covered up many places in the country. So, for one thing to fight institutional misogyny, when will this government pass Sammy's Law, which will pardon criminal convictions for grooming victims who were coerced into crimes that they were forced to do while being told to by their groomers? Will this government pass that law named after Sammy Woodhouse?
Well, that's really a matter for the Home Secretary, and I defer to her on that. But I am very, very concerned about what has gone on in places like Rotherham with grooming gangs not being brought to justice quickly enough. And we've been talking about, the overall issues with attitudes in the police service, and that is something that needs to be addressed. And it goes back to this point I was making earlier, that we have to prioritise the rights and liberties of the individual, and that is more important than what group in society somebody is from or what their background is. There can be no excuses for grooming girls, and that's very important to me.
In general then, do you worry about that sense that, particularly in that case, the police were slow to respond because they were worried effectively about political correctness?
Well, that's the point I'm making, is that is the end result of, and you see the absurdity of identity politics last week at the Labour conference, which is saying, ending up saying women don't have cervixes or whatever.
Yeah.
Of constantly trying to think about how is somebody going to judge what I'm saying or thinking, rather than thinking about what is right and just in this situation.
But then, to quote Rosie Duffield, and you're referring there to the Labour MP that felt unable to go to the Labour Party conference because she had received death threats from the trans lobby for saying only women have cervixes. Is she right?
She is right that women have cervixes, but more than that, she's also right to be able to express her view. And I'm a huge believer in free speech. And I think when we try and sort of brush things under the carpet and can't have an honest and sensible debate, I think that's a huge problem for British politics.
I mean, do you think that the really extreme trans lobby, the types who try and cancel the likes of J.K. Rowling, are doing the cause a disservice?
Well, as I said earlier, it's perfectly possible to have respect for transgender people, to have a process that is simple and kind for gender recognition at the same time as protecting single-sex spaces. And I think that's what the vast majority of the British public believe in and think. And sometimes political parties and activist movements sort of seem to get in a bubble of their own, which is just totally divorced from what's going on every day across Britain.
Yeah. The other guy with the glasses. Hello, sir.
Michael Bracken from Gerrards Cross in Buckinghamshire. Are we a credible player in Asia Pacific, the United Kingdom?
Yes, we are. I mean, we're a credible player across the world. We're part of the permanent members of the Security Council. We are a major trading nation, and what's more, with things like the Australia deal, in a world where lots of countries are turning to protectionism and putting up barriers, we're embracing free trade to help the global economy recover from COVID. And if you look at our friends and partners, whether they're Australia or the United States or Mexico, there are lots of countries who are advocating these causes. So I see us as being part of a network of freedom-loving, democratic countries who want to draw more countries into that circle and turn them away from authoritarian regimes. So absolutely, we're a credible player.
3 more questions. Let's see. This lady here, please. This lady here at the front. I'm just trying to do a proper gender balance of questions and answers. We don't have too many men.
Thank you very much. Susie Davis, former member of the Welsh Parliament. I was delighted to hear that you are foregrounding the issue of women and girls in foreign policy. I just wanted to ask you something about domestic policy, though. You've spent a little bit of today talking about specific experiences of women, which aren't exclusive to the criminal world, of course. How do you intend to foreground the role of women and girls and their specific experiences in domestic policy with your colleagues in Cabinet?
So I both cover foreign and domestic policy on women and girls. So we're doing a lot internationally for girls' education, tackling female genital mutilation. I'm also working closely with the Education Secretary about how we can get more girls studying science and maths and into STEM careers, how we can improve, and not just for women, by the way, how we can improve childcare for parents overall, because childcare in this country is too expensive, and we need to do more to help working families on that front. And of course, I'm working with the Home Secretary on what we can do to improve the criminal justice system for women. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that fundamentally, in order to have a free and successful society, we can't leave half of the population not with the same opportunities. That's the fundamental point for me. And the fact is, there is still a gap in terms of women taking on high-paid jobs. There is still a gap in terms of those domestic responsibilities, and there is still a gap in the criminal justice system. And part of levelling up isn't just levelling up, although it's very important, the north of England or, East Anglia. It's also levelling up between men and women.
On that note, with regard to childcare, are you like me? Do you come away for 5 days and need to leave a list of logistical planning for your husband, or is your husband good? Do you
That's
have
my
help?
husband over there.
So who's with the kids?
Oh, my mum.
Oh,
It's everybody's childcare resort is your mum, isn't it?
Mum and dad, quite right too. Yes, sir, over there at the back.
Thanks. Dr. Chandra Kanaganti. I'm a GP and Lord Mayor of Stoke-on-Trent City, the most happening city in the world. My question is, India has imposed a very strict quarantine rules on Friday in a tit-for-tat for our not recognizing the evidence-based vaccine given to Indian nationals visiting UK. Can you do something about it, particularly when you're planning to go to India? You don't want to spend 10 days in quarantine.
Believe me, I'm working on this on an urgent basis, and I'm in regular touch with Minister Jaishankar, the Indian Foreign Minister, on that. And we want to resolve those issues. And can I just praise Stoke-on-Trent? And virtually everywhere in the world I go, I take a piece of Stoke-on-Trent pottery to give to the relevant minister, and they're always delighted by the quality of what we do. And Stoke-on-Trent stands to hugely benefit from our trade and foreign policy. We've reduced tariffs on a lot of your fantastic products. So well done to you.
Thank you. We've got final question to this chap here in the glasses. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Liz. My name's Luke. I'm the membership lead for Blue Beyond. I was wondering what you were thinking about how the party has been effectively treating young people recently. So a few examples. Despite the success of the vaccine, students at some universities are still having to pay full fees for online learning only. The new social care levy, I believe, is mainly proportionately affecting young people in terms of the increase. And I also saw recently that the Prime Minister is considering lowering the graduate threshold for repaying their loans, which means that will be more money that we will be paying back. So why is the Conservative Party seemingly right now seeming to want to put off young people outside of this party off voting for us?
Great question. Liz?
I do agree with you, Luke, that the universities should be offering in-person teaching. There's absolutely no excuse for them not doing that. And I'm sure Nazanin Zaghari is giving them a hard time about that. On the subject of the national insurance, it was extended, so it's being paid right through the age range, unlike normal national insurance, which isn't paid by those over the age of 65. I did mention the Australian trade deal, which is going to be very beneficial for young people. I won't make that point again. But for me, the number one issue for young people is housing and the cost of housing. That is a real issue, and it's a real generational difference. And I'm delighted that Michael Gove has been appointed as Housing Secretary, and we need to be really bold and radical to get those houses built. And I think that is what is going to make a big difference with the next generation coming through, because if it is prohibitive to afford a house, if we don't get more people on the home ownership ladder, I think that's going to be a big problem for the Conservatives.
Although, don't you also think a big problem for the Conservatives will be, as was the rhetoric in the Chesham and Amersham by-election, that you are concreting over the countryside?
Well, my view is if we build more houses in and around cities, there's less need for that. At the moment, people are travelling vast distances to get into work.
Okay.
And I do think we need to do things differently. I wasn't lying about my time on a planning committee. I mean, it really is. It's a bureaucratic system that nobody likes, nobody benefits from, and I'm sure Michael Gove will sort it out.
In Gove
When
we
he's
trust.
not- yeah.
And on that note, Liz Truss, thank you so much.